All right. Hey, Dan, how's it going?
Hey.
So I see people starting to trickle in here. Welcome to another episode of React Wednesdays. For those of you that are new to the show, it's a weekly sort of hangout we do here every week here on the Code It Live channel. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate at Progress, and with me, Dan Wilson, as always.
Hey, I'm Dan Wilson. I work with Digital Primates. We do enterprise React consulting, and we curate the enterprise React newsletter. So if that's your kind of thing, Google it. We'll never sell your email address.
And like I said, I just want to quickly give a plug for some of our upcoming episodes. We do this on Twitch. We do this every week. We have some awesome guests. So this week, we're about to welcome on Chuck Pierce here in a minute. But next week, we're talking to the people at Flagsmith about feature flags. We've got Paige Niedringhaus to talk about React apps, big ones, enterprise apps. And in a few weeks, we have Tanner Lindsley on as well. So if you're interested, this is telerik.com/React Wednesdays, which I'll go ahead and toss in the chat. And we do have some new links on here too. So if you want to add React Wednesdays to a Google Calendar, you can do that and get updates whenever we go live. And you can add individual shows to the calendar as well. So make sure to check that out. But today, I want to welcome in our special guest of the day to talk about Volta. So welcome to the show, Chuck Pierce. Hey, Chuck,
Hi.
how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. So why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, all that good sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. I'm Chuck. I'm a staff software engineer at LinkedIn, and I work on JavaScript tools. So that primarily is Volta, but also just in general working on tools to help make JavaScript developers more productive.
So why don't you start? We want to talk about Volta today. So maybe you could start with just the straight up elevator pitch. What is Volta? What does it do? Where did it come from? All those sorts of things.
Yeah, definitely. So sort of at its most basic, Volta is a manager for your node versions in the similar vein to NVM or N or ASDF. There's a lot of different tools that sort of do this. And one of the things that inspired us with Volta is realizing that Node isn't the only tool that needs to be managed. In a JavaScript project, you have a package manager using npm or yarn or pnpm or something like that. Those can have different versions that have different behaviors, and you need to keep track of that. Another thing was just trying to make it as smooth and as transparent as possible. We don't want developers to be spending time worrying about their tools. We want them to be focused on making awesome software, building great web applications, things like that. The things that they're supposed to be doing, and fighting with your tools is not one of those things.
It's not on the list of things to do today. It always pops up.
Exactly. So we wanted to make that stop. And so the big thing with that is Volta uses declarative settings. So in the same way that React brings declarative UI, you just sort of tell React, this is what I want the UI to look like, and React takes care of making that happen. Volta tries to do that with your tools. You say, these are the tools I want to use, and Volta says, okay, great, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. We'll make that happen.
That's a very ambitious goal. I'm curious what the origin story was. Like, was there like a massive disaster at LinkedIn that caused you to pitch this and work on it? Like, what happened? Why did this come about?
Yeah, so there wasn't a massive disaster. We actually had a separate tool, or an earlier tool, that did a similar thing, except it was called Just, which kind of made for fun commands, because you would just node. But it required you to prefix the commands. It also was very slow and just had wasn't very ergonomic for developers to use. So we wanted to improve that. And that's where the idea of Volta came from. And in sort of setting that up, we realized, or sort of looking at the problem space, we realized that it was a problem that was more than just something that LinkedIn was dealing with. This is something that was applicable to the broader JavaScript community, which is why Volta has been open source from the start.
Can you talk about, like, when you say open source, what's the open source license it uses in philosophies?
Yeah, it's a BSD, I think, version 2 license. I have to look at that, but yeah, the idea is to make it part of the community. We don't want it to be tied to or beholden to LinkedIn at all. Even though it was engineers at LinkedIn that started it. It's not a LinkedIn project. It's not under the LinkedIn GitHub organization. It's its own separate organization. So we wanted it to be open source and sort of governed by the community.
Yeah, TJ and I have experience in commercial open source, and the licensing and the philosophies do matter quite a bit for not only those creating it, but for those consuming it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why we wanted it to have that sort of open source license from the start and be a community focused project that we then just brought into LinkedIn, as opposed to being a LinkedIn project that we brought out.
Got it. That makes sense.
Want to say hi to some people in chat. We've got Quantum joining us here today, and I like his comments. What's your user manager Volta version? That's pretty good. We've got Yuri joining us. We've got Drep. Oh man, our running joke on the show is I am just awful with usernames and just names in general. So Drepla Cayman we'll go with.
Dr. Replica Main.
Oh. Replica Man.
D Replica Main.
Interesting. Maybe
Dr. Acula. Maybe that's what it is. Dr. Acula.
Digimon as well. So thanks everybody for joining. And I know I have some questions too, but feel free to drop in with any also. So I'm curious, Chuck, then. So I'm imagining LinkedIn is working at a scale that probably your average sort of development shop isn't. Do you think Volta is like a best fit where, like, sort of in a place where you have multiple versions of Node and lots of different apps flying around? Because I have to imagine it, at least in my head, it seems like this is a better fit the more complex of a thing or the more complex of an organization you're operating in.
I think it does fit there a little bit better, but even a single engineer not working on a specific team, if you're working on a couple different projects, maybe one open source project that you contribute to, and then your own private project, already there's the potential for needing to deal with multiple versions. So really it's sort of anything more than one, I think, is where it starts to become useful to have some sort of manager for your Node and other tools.
Gotcha. Well, I have some other questions, but maybe it might make sense at this point to actually just see it in action, and we can go from there. I know you were going to demo some of this for us today. Would now be a good time to switch over to that?
Sure. Yeah. Let me. Where'd you go? Move stuff apparently.
And also, while you're doing that, I got to say props to the branding for Volta is amazing. Like, I love the name, the lightning bolts. You're on brand with the emoji in your username today too. So
thank you. Yeah, we went through a lot of iterations on finding the right name, and once we sort of Volta hit and it all kind of made sense, and then it had that lightning speed kind of connotation, so we landed on the zap emoji as a useful one.
It's way more pizzazzy than just.
Definitely.
Do you have any swag for Volta yet, like stickers and such?
We don't. We got some T-shirts made for the team, and they arrived at the office like the day that the lockdown started, and so I think they're still sitting in a box at the office almost a year later. Okay, so I've got just this demo directory. It has a bunch of different these sort of sub projects that have small package.jsons, but what I've got is Volta lets you pick a default version of Node and Yarn and things like that, and that's sort of what gets used. That's kind of like your system version. It's what gets used when you're outside of a project. So right now, if I do like Node version, my default is 15.7. But then if I go and just say the Node 12 project, which has this package JSON here, and we can see we have this Volta Node 12.20. If I do Node version, it says, oh, I need to get 12.20, so it's going to fetch it. And once that finishes, my internet's going to be a little slow because I'm streaming this. But
so in this case, you've already got Volta sort of in place here.
Yeah.
So like Node is sort of, I guess, is Volta even managing like the commands itself? So like Node is presumably Volta at this point, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of how Volta works under the hood is it creates shims for all these commands like Node and Yarn. And so Volta says, okay, great, let's figure out which one. And then it delegates to the appropriate version.
And local shims too. So like if you step completely out of this project structure together, like would there be a global nodes, or could you still have like a global node outside of your like Volta ecosystem?
Yeah, so that's the default version I was talking about. So if I step out, I could even go here and do, or it's still that 15.7.
Yeah, because Quantum's asking too, does that mean you actually have to remove your actual node from your path? And it sounds like no, because
so kind of. The Volta installer takes care of that. It makes sure to put itself first. But yeah, so there is sort of the fight of whichever one is first on the path wins. So, but at the same time, Volta also has the ability, if you don't want to pick a default version with Volta, it will delegate to the system version. If it says, okay, I have no idea what node version to use, I'll just let the rest of the system handle it.
Okay, so Volta is acting almost like a proxy here to choose which node to call.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's one of the big reasons why it's written in Rust, which I haven't had a chance to mention, but it's all of the Volta binaries that run everything are written in Rust. And the reason for that is that it's a systems level language, so it's very fast. So it's able to do that proxy behavior without really even being noticeable. On my sort of work MacBook, I think we measured it to be around 20 milliseconds.
Oh, that's terrible. You guys got to get it down to 19.
Yeah. So yeah, here I switched into the Node 14 directory, which if I can pull up that package JSON just has Node 14, and then it also has a Yarn version picked. So where'd you go there? And so now it says, okay, I need to fetch Node 14, and then once it finishes that, it'll also say, oh, it says Yarn. I need to make sure I have Yarn available too.
And presumably it's caching these, right? Like this is just like the first time you want this specific version. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's anytime you see a version you haven't seen before, it does that. Otherwise, it will. So okay. And now I can do Yarn as well and get the 1.22.10. And if I go back out, I have a default version of Yarn set that is 1.17. So it's just switching directories. You just run the commands that you're used to, and they just work. We can also set the npm version. So here, if I do npm version, it says, oh, I need to get npm 7.
Okay, so you're able to configure all your tools with the versions in the package JSON and have the directory can have its own sort of configuration, and then the tool will get what it already has and then fetch what it doesn't, and then make sure everything's assembled according to the instructions in the package JSON.
Exactly. And then the other another thing that it does, like I mentioned, there's more tools than just Node. There's Node, there's the package managers, but there's also a lot of tools that get installed where it's recommended to be installed as npm install -- global, which has its benefits of being like, okay, great, I can call this command from anywhere. But the downside is you might not get the right version. If you're working on a project that uses a different version than the one you have installed, it's easy to forget how to call it. So Volta also provides that. So if I do an npm install global TypeScript, it'll get to the usual npm install, and okay, and then if I TSC version, I think it's 4.1.3. Okay, but then if I go into I have a TypeScript project, and in this one, let me pull up that package JSON. So this package JSON, it's the regular dependencies, and it says, oh, I'm using TypeScript 3.9.7. So in this directory, if I do TSC version, it says it will detect and use your local version for any of your global packages as well.
So, okay, hold on a second. How does it know? Because the TypeScript, you didn't put it in the Volta bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does it know that Volta is managing TypeScript in this case, since it's just in the dependencies there?
Yeah, so the first piece is when I did the global install of TypeScript, Volta detects that we're doing that and says, okay, great, we need to create a shim for TSC, and I think TS server is the other, any of the binaries that TypeScript has. So it creates those shims, and then within the project, when I run one of those binary, one of those global binary shims, it checks. We're already looking at the project or the package JSON to find the Volta key. It checks for those. It checks the dependencies, because that's how you're supposed to manage in the Node ecosystem your dependencies. If you put them in dependencies or dev dependencies, so it checks those and says, okay, this package was actually is a local package, so we'll make sure to call the local version.
So you've made attempts to sort of stay with the customs of JavaScript developers and not like force them to do something totally different other than just this Volta key, which makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. That was the whole goal, was to sort of let people work the way they're used to working.
And you mentioned that TypeScript is sort of intercepted by Volta, if that's a fair way to say it. Is there like a list of intercepted binaries, or can you configure that?
Yeah. So by default, so by default, we intercept Node and NPM and Yarn and NPX. We are working on PNPM support, which will be PNPM and PNPX. But so basically, by default, we're only doing Node and the package manager, and everything else is opt-in when you do a global install. You're telling it, you're sort of telling the system, hey, I want this to be available everywhere. And Volta says, okay, great, we'll make sure that's available everywhere and make sure it correctly delegates. And then you can go ahead.
Oh, there's some questions coming in. I think I saw a TJ getting shifty, but before we get to those, let me just finish this line of questioning here. So imagine for a minute that we're Volta users and we want to intercept something weird that the Volta team hasn't either gotten around to or wants to. Is there an extension methodology so we can do that?
You mean, well, so anything that you can install with the with NPM will work. If it's something outside of that, not really. There have been some discussions. We've even got some suggestions from people of expanding it to other languages like Python or I think Ruby was the other one that where a similar thing would do. But at the moment, we don't really have a add your own completely non-JavaScript or completely non-NPM system.
Yeah, fair enough.
So a couple of good questions did come in. So first of all, Christian wants to know, is there any relationship at all to the engines key that you can also put in your package.json file?
That is a great question. It's a question that's come up a lot and something we looked at. So the answer is no, there isn't. And there's a few reasons for that. One is kind of conceptually, engines defines the kind of maximal range that your project can support. It will work on all of these versions. The Volta setting is designed to be the version that you use on the development side. So it's kind of user versus builder. So that conceptually it's a little different. Technically speaking, the big issue is that engines allows you to have a range, which because Volta is sort of reevaluating each time you run a command would mean it would need to reevaluate that and potentially would just be like downloading every time there's a new Node version or a new NPM version. It would add a lot of friction to the whole process, and we tried to make it as frictionless as possible.
And Quantum asked a question that going back to the origin story. So you did mention that there was a previous tool that did something similar, but what prompted the creation of the previous one? Was there breaking changes in Node that were a problem for LinkedIn, or was it just complexity? I know too, because I've used I've tried to use MVM before, and it's just confused the crap out of me. So was it just something related to that, or was there something more to it?
I actually wasn't at LinkedIn at the time when the previous tool was built, but from what I've heard, yeah, there were issues with just the inconsistency between engineers of sort of, it works on my machine, but when you run it, you get an error. And then similarly, making sure that the CI system is using the same version that all the engineers are using is important again, so you don't have those same sets of problems.
That stuff can just destroy a sprint, and you really can't foresee it, because if you take half a day to try to diagnose something weird like that,
exactly, yeah, and it's easy to overlook, and then you spend a day being confused and finally realize, oh wait, are we using the same Node versions? And one person's on 14.2 and one person's on 14.10, and that's just different enough that
stuff happens. I remember working on a client site one time when they had this really bizarre problem, and after working on it all day and into 3 o'clock in the morning, we realized that some engineer restored a backup from exactly 1 year ago. And we didn't notice the year was different, but everything else was the same. And we kept going, this doesn't make any sense. And finally, it made sense.
Yeah, and actually at a previous job, I ran into some of the problems that Volta solves, where I was working on 2 different projects where each one of them I think required Node 4 and one of them required Node 6. That's how old this was. And I used NVM for that, but I would always forget to tell it to switch versions to, just sort of run the NVMUs. So I would switch versions and I would run my tests and everything would blow up. And wait, oh shoot, I have to remember to tell it to switch versions.
I would run into it too, where there's some like the npm packages that have binaries in them. Like Node SAS is the one that gets me all the time, where like you switch Node versions and then Node SAS is going to complain because it's like, well, hey, you have to like basically recompile within this project because you're now using something slightly different. And I know you can use like NVM to help with that, but that always just ended up being a hot mess for me. So anytime I had to switch that up, it's like upgrade to npm and just Node and hope for the best.
Yeah, so actually that's a good point, and that's I mentioned earlier. Anything you can use with npm, that you can globally install with npm will work with Volta. And the way we deal with that problem is that each package you install gets a version. It takes whatever Node version you're using as your default, and it pins it. So that package is going to be using that Node version, even if you switch your default. That package will continue to use that, so it will continue to work even if it has binary dependencies.
Which is cool. Yeah. One more question came in I want to get to. Also, what if TypeScript is declared in the local package but not installed? Will it fall back to the global version or tell you that TSC is not installed?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And actually that dovetails into, I can simulate that. Let me just remove my node modules. And then now if I do TSC, it will say it couldn't find it. And then it also tells you, hey, please make sure that all your dependencies are installed.
So that's your local one just went away, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so within this project, it detects we need to be using the local version. Oh, but it's not available. So it'll let you know to run npm install to make sure it's available. And that's another thing that one of our philosophies with Volta is that our error messages should be helpful and not just archaic and impossible to understand.
A lofty goal.
Well, because if you weren't using Volta here and would it fall back to the global TypeScript version in that case?
Yeah, I think it would just silently use the global.
Yeah, which is potentially confusing, I think, because then you could. I don't know if TSC itself is smart enough to catch the mismatch, but it's just nice to have a nice clear, hey, like you're doing something you shouldn't be doing here.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so we went through a thing maybe a year and a half ago of going through and sort of redoing all of the error messages to make sure that all of them have some type of call to action or suggestion on how to fix the problem.
That's really great. And I think you used the term developer ergonomics. Like developers feel safe and powerful with your tool, they'll use it. And if they feel confused and unsure, they won't use it. And going back through and fixing all the errors is probably not a glamorous job, but one that's well needed. And many projects could learn from that.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we're getting some really, I love these questions, but so how about symlinks? So you have a local package symlinked from wherever. Is Volta smart enough to sort of follow that symlink and work with that?
Assuming it's in your dependencies, it should work. It would depend on the specific use case, but I would think it would work. Yeah.
Okay.
It does. I know one case where symlinks come up often is npm link or yarn link, and those do work with Volta.
Okay. So I'm curious, maybe now's the time. I do want to talk about how this thing is built. Did you have anything else you wanted to show in this project, like other features?
Oh yeah, the one other feature. So because you have this Node version in here, we also added a command. So there is a Volta executable itself, but let's say this one we wanted to do the latest node. So we can tell it to pin the latest, and it will update your package JSON for you. If that version is not on your machine, it'll also make sure to download it. But so you can, we have this pin command that just lets you make easy changes to the pinned version in a project.
Actually, one question I should have asked. So let's say you have React app out built with whatever, and you want to switch to Volta. Like, what are your steps that you take to actually, like, is Volta, like, what do you use to install Volta? I guess would be one basic question.
Yeah, so this is actually a good point to make, is one of the benefits of doing everything in Rust is that we can be cross-platform. So we are Volta works exactly the same in Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. And so for the Linux and Mac OS, the installer is just a one-liner of, unfortunately, I'm not a huge fan of it, but curl and piping curl into bash.
Yeah,
which is a common pattern, but it's not the best. So I wish there was a better way. For macOS, we also have a homebrew that a community member created formula for that. But yeah, so it's just a one-liner command, and that will fetch it and make it available and set it up in your system. And then the only thing you'll have to do is open a new terminal window.
It is kind of funny to me that it's 2021 and we're still doing like the whole curl into bash thing.
Yeah.
But like it will live forever. I feel like it is funny that there's no just like, I guess I can understand why it's there, because it would be weird for there to be like, I don't even know, like an install command, or I don't even know how it would work.
Yeah, I think that the benefit it gives is that it works for Mac and all the different flavors of Linux, as opposed to having to have like a PKG file and a .deb file and a on RPM
every
all
Linux
these
distribution. Yeah,
and then for Windows we have a regular Windows MSI installer, so that is a little more standard on that side.
So we've kind of already talked about some of the Rust bits of it. So why don't we just like dive in? So for people that don't know Rust at all, maybe you could just tell people like, what is Rust, and then also maybe like why Rust was a good pick for what you're doing here.
Yeah, so Rust is a systems level language, so it's at the same level as like C or C++ or Go, but it has a lot of abstractions that make it feel like a much higher level language. It's something that I picked up when I started working on Volta. I hadn't used Rust at all before that. And so it definitely has a bit of a learning curve, because it has a lot more, I see Quantum pointing out the Rust evangelism. Yeah, it has a lot more sort of rules around memory management. The compiler forces you to be correct with your memory management. But once you get used to those, I'm amazed constantly at how productive I'm able to be writing a systems level language and writing Rust, but still feeling like I'm using a much higher level language.
I'm curious then, is there like a local, is there somebody at LinkedIn that's like a big Rust fan, or did like you just think like, I need this and like, let me evaluate my options?
Yeah, so actually the principal engineer who sort of started the very first proof of concept for Volta is Dave Herman, who was running Mozilla Research when they created Rust. So he definitely had
he had a
vested interest in it.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to take a look at some Rust code and kind of walk through someone who wants to take first steps? There seems to be some fans in the chat of Rust, at least.
Yeah, I can probably do
And if we can show Quantum's comments again, just not because of the comments themselves, but every time I see his icon, I see Stroopwafel, and I would love to have a Stroopwafel. So if you're out there in the audience and can email me some Stroopwafels, please do so.
And while you're bringing this up, not to force you to multitask here, but Christian has another good question. So the equivalent of, I'm actually curious about this as well. If you're trying to like kill all your node modules and like npm install in Volta, so like if you wanted to force everything to like kill it all, build it back up, is there like an equivalent command of how to do that in Volta?
Not for sort of everything at once. There is, we will do sort of the same interception on if you do like npm uninstall -g to uninstall a global, it will do, Volta will take over in that case. It actually gives a little message that says, Volta is removing this package for you, and it just does sort of, it just fully deletes the directory that was installed in, because they're all in separate directories. So it's able to do it a lot easier than npm trying to figure out what's installed.
Gotcha. And Dan, apparently this is not a stroopwafel. It's a oh man, do you want to take it?
Belgian liege waffle.
Liege, okay.
Which is like a light waffle. Like if you get a Belgian waffle for brunch, it's probably not as good as the ones that Quantum is getting in Belgium, but it's analogous. And I'll take those too. I'm an equal opportunity waffle guy.
I'm curious. I've never written a line of Rust code, so I haven't drank the Rust Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I'm interested too, because like if I think about it, the first thing I would think of is what would I build with a systems language? And my brain goes a little blank. And so I'm dying to kind of see what this is about, because there's got to be a lot of stuff I'd like. I just don't know what I could do.
Yeah, so this is actually Volta itself. So this is the function that determines what what we call internally the platform is, sort of like what versions of Node and Yarn and NPM should be used. So we have, we're getting the current. We have a session that sort of keeps track of all of our high-level state, and we one of the big features that I love about Rust is the pattern matching. So we do this match on the project platform, and if it's there, we can do something, and if it's not there, if it's nothing, or none in this case, we do something else. And then we do some delegation here where we check to pull any custom versions of Yarn and NPM, from we do some merging of the different platforms.
Is that if you scroll up to like 2 or 3 lines, is that like a type, the session up there on 246?
Yeah, so session is a type. It's a custom. It's another, one of our internal types that it's a struct that we have internally that just holds on to sort of information about the project, information about what tools are installed and things like that. And then this is a mutable reference to that.
So is Rust weakly typed, strongly typed?
Rust is strongly typed.
Okay.
And it goes beyond that. So this, like I mentioned, this is a mutable reference. So that means that with this reference, we could make changes. We could to that object, and the Rust compiler will enforce that you can either have one mutable reference or any number of immutable references, but you can't mix and match. So you can never have a reference to something that changes out from underneath you.
Interesting. So
yeah, the borrow checker there is what keeps track of that. Is one of those tools that it forces you kind of fight with it at first, but eventually, at least in my experience, you come into an agreement and start to realize that it's helping you.
So we have another really good question. I really like this one. So with the rate Volta is going, do you think the community would integrate its package manager over NPM and Yarn in some way?
So we don't actually have a package manager. We leverage NPM and Yarn directly. I have some pie in the sky dreams about making one in Rust, but that's a far way away. Our goal is to sort of fit a little above the package manager level or around it, and let the community use whatever they think is the best of those.
In general, though, do you think there's more of a future for Rust being used for some of these tools? Because like a lot of these tools, like NPM is not known for being fast, right? Like it's like a common meme. Same with like Node, a lot of these tools. And I guess like there's no reason a lot of these things have to be written in JavaScript. Like I think my guess is they are mostly because it's just familiarity with like the people working on it. And also like if you're doing JavaScript things, it probably does help a little bit to be in JavaScript. But I'm actually surprised more of these tools, like in our standard tool chain, are still built with JavaScript, because JavaScript's a great language and such, but at the end of the day, like you can do it faster in things like Rust, or just really anything closer to the metal.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, from what I've seen, some desire to use systems level languages for some of these tools. A big example of that is ESBuild, which I believe is written in Go, as sort of a replacement for Webpack. So I've seen some definite movement in that way. I think there's a tension because while you mentioned the familiarity, another benefit of having a tool written in JavaScript is the size of the potential contributing community. The entire JavaScript community can contribute to Webpack, whereas only that subset that knows Go or is willing to learn Go can contribute to ESBuild. So there's a tension there of the speed of development in terms of how many people you have the potential to join the project versus the speed of the tool. And I think there's cases to be made in both directions.
So is that something you've noticed on do like Volta specifically? Like, do you get people do you think it's a hindrance that it's written in Rust? Do you get contributors still?
We get a few contributors. We're still growing the community, but I do think it probably has been a bit of we've gotten fewer contributors than we would if it was in JavaScript, but in terms of, there's a couple of reasons not to do Volta in JavaScript. Is one, if it was written in JavaScript, it would need Node or something to run it. So then it would have to kind of bootstrap itself with an inbuilt version of Node or something like that. And then the other is just the speed. Like I said, we want it, because it's doing a lot of these calculations and figuring out, or context detection every time you run a command. We wanted it to be as fast as possible with that.
Well, that's an interesting point, because as an open source project but funded by a rather sizable technology organization, this may not be like a current problem that you have, but it is interesting to note that your target audience is really unqualified to contribute back to the code in some ways. Are there other opportunities or areas where users of Volta can contribute without having to know Rust?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the sort of the first one you run into, which is common in a lot of open source projects, is documentation. We have docs on our website that we think are pretty good, but there's always room for making that better, and calling out different little edge cases or things like that. And also, even if you don't know Rust, don't really have a desire to learn Rust and contribute code, contributing suggestions for improvements or bug reports is huge. It helps us make the project better. It helps us think about things in different ways and really understand the use cases that the users have. We have a lot of them that we came up with both ourselves as JavaScript developers and within LinkedIn as people started to use it. But the more perspectives we can get, the better of a solution we can come up with.
Have you noticed an uptake in interest after your December announcement?
Yeah, definitely. We've had definitely a lot more interest. We've had a few, sort of the rate of issues with people having either questions or bugs has gone up a little bit. There's been some more chatter of just even on Twitter or kind of blog posts and things like that, where it seems like people are definitely checking it out and hopefully liking it.
I'm actually curious I guess the origin of, or like how LinkedIn handles open source. So was this what was the decision like to put this open source versus just use this internally at LinkedIn? Like, what is, I guess, LinkedIn trying to, hoping to get out of maintaining and putting this project out there?
Yeah, I think like I said at the beginning, the reason we're putting it out there as part of as a community-driven project is that it solves more than just a LinkedIn problem. This is a problem that is that applies to pretty much any JavaScript organization. What LinkedIn gets out of it is it makes it sort of it normalizes everything. So if more people in the community are using Volta, they've used it, they're familiar with it. When they join LinkedIn as engineers, there's no learning curve there. They're used to it. Whereas with our previous tool with Just, that was a big thing. It's like we had to teach you, okay, you need to remember to prefix all your commands with Just, and there were a couple custom commands in there that you had to remember to use. And so there was this extra onboarding cost on top of everything else. Whenever you join a new company, it's already a fire hose of information. And so on top of that, we had this, oh, by the way, when you're running your commands, you also have to do these things. So just trying to reduce that as much as possible is the benefit that we get out of it.
Do you have any goals related to the project, to help it grow? Do you have are you doing any sort of I guess this would be one example of getting the word out and doing outreach, but like, is that part of your like actual responsibilities with things, is to try to make it bigger?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know that there's a specific, this is my responsibility as the lead maintainer. I'm trying to build the community, because I think, based on my experience using it and based on the feedback we've gotten, I think it's a great product. And so I'm trying to get the word out for that and to grow the community. Again, to find people, to get more perspectives, but also to hopefully find people who can contribute. And yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of technical goals, there's also, I mentioned the error messages. We've talked about the transparency. We want Volta to get out of the way. And in fact, one of the best compliments I think we've ever gotten is engineers who say they forget they're using it. They just, they installed it, they got things set up with their projects, and then they forget about it, because every time they run Node, it runs the right version and they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, there's your new tagline. Forget the hassle-free JavaScript toolchain manager. Just go with Volta. It's so easy, you'll forget you're using it.
It's a good idea. Might have to do
it. I'm impressed, because it's got to be fun telling the world about something you really enjoy. And just from hearing your enthusiasm for the project and seeing that the problems you're solving, it seems like a very rewarding situation. Like, can you kind of talk through, like, do you intend on being at any conferences this year, if we ever have them, or are you looking for places to spread the word on podcasts and such?
Yeah, definitely. I'm in the process. Actually, right now, it seems like I've gotten sort of that inundation of CFPs are opening for conferences, whether they're going to be virtual or hoping to be in person. So yeah, I'm definitely looking at submitting some to those to try and spread the word and get the idea out. And part of that too is this, we like the solution we came up with, and we've sort of been thinking about it. And one of the concepts we've come up with is calling it kind of tool chains as code. So an analogy to infrastructure as code, where you can have, you write out your config file that says, this is how much, how many servers I need or whatever, and you pass it off to Kubernetes or whatever technology it is, and it just makes that happen. Volta is trying to do that with your JavaScript tools. You write out your configuration and it makes it happen for you. And that idea, I feel like, is something that is potentially applies to even more than the JavaScript world. There's plenty of development tools where it would be nice if you could just have a configuration file that says, these are the tools you need to use, and you use them, and it makes sure that everyone on the team is using the same versions, and your CI system uses the same versions. So that's definitely a concept we like.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, so one of the very first things that came up in chat is kind of a joke, is like, what maintains Volta? But actually, to come full circle, I am actually curious, when there are new versions of Volta, how do you notify people, like in the terminal, when they run like a Volta command, or how do they know they can upgrade Volta itself?
Yeah, we don't have a update checker at the moment built into the tool. There's some ideas on how to do that without making it intrusive. But so right now it's just sort of the announcements. We put it up on Twitter. We put it in the Discord. And essentially the installer is capable of upgrading as well. So you just sort of run that again, and it takes care of everything.
And then I guess, what's coming for Volta? Do you have what sort of roadmap things do you want to tackle, new features and such?
Yeah, right now we're working on Volta list, which is our command that sort of shows you everything that you have fetched already, and lets you get a snapshot of what's available, and also what versions are going to be used. And so we're working on improving that to make it provide even more information. So that's one piece. Support for PNPM is the other one that we are actively working on, because that's an up and coming, if you will, for something that's been around for a while, package manager that seems to be more and more popular. So being able to support that, as well as the existing NPM and Yarn.
Replica Main had a question a couple minutes back about using Volta to test authenticity. Did we get to that?
I don't think so. I could bring that one up. Can you use Volta to test authenticity of a package on top of what NPM does?
I don't think so. I mean, I know npm does the SHA-SUM checking for you, but we don't add anything at the moment on top of that.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if you want to clarify in chat, just because like I'm kind of curious what extra authenticity you would want to be able to do. I don't think I've ever heard anybody ask. That's interesting.
Given that this is React Wednesday, is LinkedIn using a lot of React?
We aren't actually. Most of our stack is Ember. I believe there's some evaluation going on whether to continue with that, but I don't know the status of that. Yeah.
Well, if that changes, ping us because we have invested in React.
Definitely, we know some people. Yeah. So I'll put out if Chad, if you have any other questions that you want to bring up, let us know. I guess one sort of last one I have. I think what Volta does is kind of. I think the most incredible thing to me is that it seems pretty seamless, because I know once you get into like the Bash Linux world and managing these things, like that to me is still like just chaos. So like, has Rust been true to its sort of thing of like, it really is cross-platform? Do you get like bug reports of like, I'm using this obscure Linux distribution and this weird error happens, or like Windows people with some strange thing? Because like part of me thinks that would consume your time of like these weird edge cases, just because of the nature of what you're doing, because you are really going at the system level.
Yeah, there's a few of those. The big Linux distro one is Alpine Linux, I think it's called, which is using a lot of minimal Docker images. Doesn't have all the libraries. It uses a different version of libc, I think, is the main one. So Volta just kind of doesn't work in that at the moment. But it could be compiled to work that way. We just haven't figured that out. And then for Windows, yeah, I do think that for a while there was a lot of work we had to do on that, like you were describing, that interface between the Rust side on Volta and the system using Bash, and for Windows, sort of PowerShell and the command cmd.exe, and git bash is the other one that's pretty common on Windows. And there were a lot of weird edge cases that resulted in like, okay, we need to do this and that, and kind of building up these hacks, for lack of a better word, to get around, to make sure that everything works seamlessly in all the different shells and environments and things like that. There was definitely a lot of weird stuff. One of the weirdest ones is git bash on Windows. If you type node, will silently turn that into node.exe before executing it. So you can't overwrite it with a shell script that's named node or node.cmd. You have to have a .exe file. So it's a little strange.
That's that little paperclip in the background saying, I see you're trying to run a command. You must be.
Yeah, but what's weird is it only does that for node. It's a special case for node. Oh, really? Like if you run npm, it just runs it as npm, but node, it does node.exe. So it's a...
One day, I think I'm going to get invited to this special smoky room where they're going to explain all the weird intricacies of Windows and actually why it's that way, and then things will make a lot more sense in the world.
Well, I think it's not a current room. I think it's a room that happened in like 1997, and then those decisions were sort of set in stone for the next forever, essentially.
It's very possible that's the case.
So Dr. The Replica said, talking about auditing the package for vulnerabilities, download count, identify README, and detecting possible issues.
Okay, yeah, we don't do anything like that currently. We essentially delegate to whatever the global install is. So whatever npm does when you do npm i-g, it'll do.
Well, cool.
So if someone wanted to use the SHA comparison, like does Volta just stay out of the way of that, or does it block it somehow?
Yeah, no, it stays out of the way. Like I said, it just does whatever npm. It literally calls npm. It just sets up a directory and says, hey, instead of installing into what you want to use as the global directory, install it into this temp directory, and then we'll move that to where we want it to go.
I gotcha. So Volta stays out of the way as much as possible.
Yeah.
It seems hard to market. Like, it's like, we do great stuff. What do you do? Well, you'll never really know that we're here.
Well, that's why I like that, so easy to use, you'll forget you're using it idea as a tagline.
We also we have lots of requests for stickers and shirts. I definitely need a sticker because I'm definitely a sticker person. So
I am too. So yeah, we'll definitely have to get some stickers made.
You mean that's not wallpaper behind you, TJ?
Yeah, see that? You can see where my collection is back here from lots of random conferences.
There's a spot right there for a Volta sticker. You can see it right there.
It's calling for a lightning bolt somewhere back in there. So,
and by the enthusiasm for swag, maybe this is how you can fund the project.
Maybe.
Dumber things have happened. Trust me.
Get on LinkedIn's balance sheet. Volta merch is just like sky up into the right.
Line item. T-shirt spring.
But that's when we stop making developer tools and just start making swag.
Yeah. So this has been a lot of fun. Is there anything that we haven't gotten into that you think like people really need to know about Volta? Any topic that hasn't come up at all?
Trying to look at my notes, and I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered it.
So it sounds like if you want to get started, just go to the Volta. Actually, I can drop the link. It's easily Googleable, I'm sure. But I like the domain name too. Volta.sa. Yeah.
There's a lot of, I don't know who's in charge of this stuff, but the branding and the tone of the website and like the choice of URLs, like this seems all very carefully cultivated. So please give my professional admiration to who's in charge of that. They really weren't just phoning it in. They tried to do something and it came off well.
Definitely. Yeah. We put time into trying to make it an exciting place to, sort of a.
Well, I keep noticing these little details, like what you curl from is get.volta.sh, which is just like chef's kiss, right? Like super nice and clean.
Exactly.
Actually, does that domain, like, how do you get is it .sh domain? What is that?
I'm not sure. I think it might just be a top level
country, right?
How do you get?
I don't know if it's a country or if it's just a top level like nerd domain like .dev.
SH is the Internet Country Code top-level domain for St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha, British Overseas Territories. So,
okay, there you go.
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing y'all didn't know that, really.
Well, I'm sure Dave did. He's the one who set up the website initially. But
yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, as long as there are no follow-up questions about where St. Helena actually is, I'm going to feel very competent here.
Oh yeah, there you go. Quantum.
It's funny.
But yeah, and actually we did put some work into, so the get.volta.sh domain essentially redirects to the GitHub repo, and we have a script in there, which is what gets downloaded. Okay. So one, you can go look at that if you don't trust it. But we put some effort into getting that set up so that you don't have to pass any flags to curl.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I've seen some of all the times I've curled something into Bash, this is like the cleanest, because normally it's like you're curling something that's just some monstrosity, right? Like some horrible URL, and there's some extra flags that God knows what it actually does. And you're just
originally we had some flags, but we figured out that we were able to set up the redirect in the right way that it didn't need to do that, and then to just make that as smooth as possible. Yeah.
Very professional.
Well, cool. I know if there's nothing else, and one thing we'd like to wrap up with is any sort of plugs you might have, anything outside of Volta. Is there anything else you kind of want to plug tech-wise or otherwise? I guess, like, where's a good place to like follow you, those sorts of things? Yeah.
I'm on Twitter and I have it right there at Chuck A. Pierce.
Yep, and I'll drop it in the chat too.
Tend to do lots of just sort of things, I'll tweet about tech and retweet Volta stuff, but also just, earlier today I was retweeting people's reaction to the GameStop thing, and
it's only going to keep going up.
Yeah. And beyond that, I think check out Rust. Honestly, I think it's a great language. I think it's got some momentum, but more is always useful. And while it does have a steep sort of initial learning curve, once you get over that, like I said, I'm constantly amazed at how productive I can be in a language that is as low level and fast as it is.
Yeah, I saw some of that with the code. It looked like it's all wrapped up in these higher level functionality pieces, and
yeah, it has a lot of functional constructs that it's able to do without overhead, which is one of the things that sort of like zero overhead abstractions. So
it's excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. Dan, you want to drop your plug?
Yeah, I'll plug the Enterprise React newsletter. Again, all of our developer staff submits the articles, and so they're developer approved.
And I'll once again plug just the React Wednesdays homepage, which I'll drop in here one last time. We've got some better, I'm slowly learning how calendars work, which has kind of been a fun, awful process. Turns out calendars are not fun, in case anybody didn't know, but I kind of have it working. So you are able to add episodes to your calendar if there's just like one thing you spot that you're interested in. But we do this every week, same time slot. Next week, we're talking feature flags with Flagsmith, which I'm sort of fascinated by as well. So check that out. But for today, thanks, Chuck. This was a lot of fun. I actually,
thanks for having me.
I'm going to install Volta just after this because I've got like just working in DevRel. I manage like, I just have all these stupid demo projects lying around. And every time I step into them, it's like, oh God, what version of Node was I using of this? Like sometimes I have to resurrect a demo and it's like just going into the crypt and just praying that everything still works.
Definitely. Yeah, that's one of the things one of the benefits we got too is for those of us who work on supporting JavaScript engineers, we jump into a lot of different projects, and being able to not have to figure that out every time is super useful.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out. Like I said, we do this every Wednesday, so come hang out with us. All right.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks, Jen.